Today we read Jane Eyre. This book is the work of British female writer Charlotte Brontë, and it is also an autobiographical work, telling the story of a British woman who became an orphan since she was a child, insisted on herself in various tribulations, constantly pursued freedom and dignity, and finally achieved happiness. In the book, the poor and humble, ordinary-looking female teacher dares to challenge the patriarchal society of the West for thousands of years, and it is this shocking struggle that has made Jane Eyre a classic literary image for more than a century. The protagonist Jane Eyre is an ordinary-looking, a little girl with a strong personality. She was born into a poor family of priests. Jane Eyre's parents have only been married for a little over a year. Because of typhoid fever, both passed. So Jane Eyre was still young. He was sent to his uncle's house at Gateshead Manor to be raised. But Uncle Mr. Reed died. He also died when Jane Eyre was 1 year old. Before Mr. Reed died, he once told his wife to take good care of Jane Eyre. But after that, Jane Eyre's days at Mrs. Lydd's house, not even as good as a servant. My aunt was very disgusted with her. The cousins also looked down on her. The most hateful thing, her cousin John often beat and bullied her. This day, 10-year-old Jane Eyre is reading. The tall cousin John came over again. I saw Jane Eyre reading a book. John began to abuse her. After saying that, he smashed Jane Eyre to the ground with a book. Jane Eyre's head hit the door and bleeded. The unbearable feeling of pain overcame fear. She stood up and resisted. However, in this family, the result of resistance is even more painful torture. Soon, she was imprisoned in the terrifying Red House by her aunt. Just at the beginning, the passion of resistance constantly encouraged her. She was not afraid. Here she talks to herself about the injustice of fate. But when night is approaching, the courage in her heart slowly disappeared. This was once the place where my uncle Mr. Reed died. It is also her remains. A place that was once worshipped. A mahogany bed stands in the center of the room. In the dark and silent air, there is an eerie atmosphere. This is for a little girl who is only 10 years old. The fear brought by it is undoubtedly enormous. That night, Jane Eyre is a fantasy ghost. I was so scared that I shouted. She was close to collapsing. Hurriedly begged my aunt for mercy. Jane Eyre is just a vicious nature. People with a despicable soul. Mrs. Lydd howled in pain at her. He ignored it. Soon Jane Eyre was so frightened that she fainted. After waking up, Jane Eyre was seriously ill. The weakness of the body can still be tolerated. But the pain in my heart. But it often made her cry secretly. She didn't want to stay at Mrs. Lydd's house anymore. However, Mrs. Lydd has long been extremely bored with her. Soon Jane Eyre was sent to Lowood boarding school by him. Lowood School is not only strict in its canons, the living environment is also extremely harsh. The students here are all orphans. The school relies on the name of educating orphans, raise charitable funds from the outside world. But most of the donations were put into personal pockets. The food that is often burned at school. It's hard to swallow. Children are not fed or clothed here. He is often punished by teachers. They are not only physically tortured and suffer mental devastation. Afterward, it was here that Jane Eyre met the orphan Helen and make friends. Helen is different from Jane Eyre, who is good at resisting. She seems to have a reluctance to accept it. She always endured injustice in silence, faced the teacher's punishment. Helen's attitude of silence and non-resistance made Jane Eyre very puzzled. But Helen said, "Violence is not the best way to eliminate hatred. Revenge will never heal the injury." On Helen, Jane Eyre learned what patience and tolerance are. The treasurer and superintendent of the school, it was the sanctimonious Pollock Hurst. He often cultivates students to be patient and tolerant. The excuse of verbal self-denial restricts students' diet and living environment. And listen to Mrs. Lydd's greed. Say it in front of all teachers and students. Jane Eyre is ungrateful. People with a mouthful of lies. And let Jane Eyre stand for half an hour. This incident made Jane Eyre lose face. I was very sad. Just when he was out of breath. It was Helen with coffee and bread with warm and calm words. It soothed his heart. Except for Helen. Miss Tamble at school also took good care of Jane Eyre. Tambor was solemn. Tantu is elegant. She is not as domineering as other teachers. After confirming Jane Eyre's self-report, Miss Tambor gathered all the teachers and students of the school. It was completely clarified in public about Brockhurst's denigration of Jane Eyre. With the help of Miss Tambor, after Jane Eyre unloaded this heavy burden, he was determined to overcome all difficulties, begin to learn knowledge through obstacles. But soon, a contagious typhoid fever. But it took the lives of many orphans. Because the students have always been half full. No one cares about a cold. So most of them were infected with typhoid fever. Among the 85 girls, 45 people fell ill all of a sudden. Many have already been infected. I can only go home and wait for death. Some died in school. Will be quietly buried. Because of the contagious nature of this disease, it was decided that there would be no room for delay. But what hit Jane Eyre hard? Her best friend Helen also died of typhoid fever. Fortunately, this time the virus and the number of victims, it also attracted public attention to the school. Thereupon, people are concerned about the root cause of this disaster. An investigation was launched, and the facts that are gradually disclosed. But it greatly angered the public. The location of the school is not good for health. The difference in the amount of food the children eats. The water used for cooking smells disgusting. The students' poor clothing and living conditions were exposed. The result of the exposure made Master Brockhurst embarrassed. But it made the school very proud. So the school rules were reformulated. Food and clothing have also improved. And a more suitable teaching building was built in a better location. All funding is also entrusted to a committee. The school thus became a truly useful and noble institution. After the school gets new students, Jane Eyre lived here for another 8 years. She was a student for 6 years. During this period, Jane Eyre took advantage of the favorable conditions offered here. He became the first place in the first class. Later, after graduation, he was awarded the position of teacher. I worked passionately for 2 years. But 2 years later she changed her mind again. After all kinds of changes, Miss Tambo of the school. He has always held the position of principal. For Jane Eyre, Miss Tamble also acts as her own mother and governess. She has always given Jane Eyre love and church that she has never had. Later Miss Tamble got married and followed her husband to a distant place. Miss Tamble's departure also gave Jane Eyre the intention of leaving. Longing for freedom, she has long been tired of life at school. She looks forward to seeking the true meaning of life in a wider world. Because I don't have much experience in society. Jane Eyre thought for a moment. Advertisements were placed in the newspapers. Seek the work of a tutor externally. Unexpectedly, the housekeeper of Thornfield Manor quickly hired her. Thornfield is an old luxury manor, but there are not many people in the manor. Under the introduction of the housekeeper, Jane Eyre knew that her student Adelia was a small, pale-faced little girl under 10 years old, and that Mr. Rochester, the owner of the manor, was her guardian. Everything at Thornfield Manor looks solemn and magnificent, and Jane Eyre's life here is full of peace and tranquility. When Jane Eyre goes out for a walk on a path, I met the owner of the manor who had just returned from abroad. This is their first meeting. Because the road surface is narrow and slippery. Rochester fell off his frightened horse. Jane Eyre hurriedly stepped forward to help him. After returning home, after the introduction of the mediocre, Jane Eyre knew. He is the mysterious manor owner, Mr. Rochester. However, teaching Adela to learn is not easy. He was often inattentive, still making excuses everywhere. I want to go find Rochester. Back to Rochester on the estate. Also had face-to-face communication with Jane Eyre. He learns about Jane Eyre's past and evaluate what Jane Eyre said. But Rochester has a gloomy personality and moody people. He and Jane Eyre often debated a certain idea. And Jane Eyre also knew from him. His own student, Miss Adele. not his biological daughter. Rochester's former French mistress abandoned him. But he took the mistress's illegitimate daughter Adele. Adopted. In the days that followed, Jane Eyre is found in Thornfield Manor. Strange things are happening all the time. One night, Jane Eyre was awakened by a strange laugh, walked upstairs to find that Rochester's door was open. A large amount of smoke came out of it, walked into the room and saw that the bed was on fire. Jane Eyre hurriedly woke up Rochester, who was still sleeping, and helped put out the fire. When Jane Eyre said that she heard strange laughter, Rochester hurriedly told Jane Eyre that there lived a deranged seamstress Gracepool on the 3rd floor, and after expressing her gratitude she instructed Jane Eyre to keep the matter a secret. In his voice, there is a peculiar vitality. There was a strange fire. From his sincere gratitude, Jane Eyre felt a strange sense of strength and excitement. I went back and thought hard all night. I didn't clear out my head. Wait until the next day to see Grace. But he was very surprised by his reaction. After a random guess, Jane Eyre seems to be very good at Rochester. Produced a wonderful feeling. From the beginning, he saw her. Now it is starting again. I long to see her. But since then, Mr. Rochester's whereabouts are unknown. People say that she has fallen in love with the young and beautiful Miss Ingram. This made Jane Eyre feel an unspeakable pain. It also made her start to look into her heart. Emotions made her miss Rochester. Looking forward to the reunion. Reason told her. Their identities and statuses are far apart. Don't be delusional. In the end, reason prevailed. However, when Rochester came back again, he often held parties with Miss Ingram and a group of noble guests. Thornfield Manor also began to get busy. At a ball, Jane Eyre's status as a governess, received by a noble wife. The humiliation of the ladies. She endured humiliation and left the living room. Unexpectedly. But he had a face-to-face with Rochester. Rochester asked Jane Eyre. Why in the living room? Didn't talk to her. Why is the face pale? Feeling blue. Jane Eyre couldn't tell her. The waves in my heart. Looking at Jane Eyre. Rochester had to give up. When parting, she insisted on the future. I want Jane Eyre to go to the living room too. This time, after many days of contact, Rochester has fallen in love with Jane Eyre. And Jane Eyre felt it too. I developed feelings for Rochester myself. Once, after Rochester went out, one suddenly came to the house. A soothsayer with a fierce hijab. When it was Jane Eyre's turn to tell fortunes. But he managed to ask. Jane Eyre is not in this house. A certain man has a concern and a good impression. And pointed to Mr. Rochester. Jane Eyre was very surprised. Could it be that there are elves watching him? And told the soothsayer everything. The soothsayer told Jane Eyre. Fate wants to give him happiness. But she needs to reach out and fight for it herself. This is what Jane Eyre discovered. This mysterious soothsayer is Rochester. She wanted to use this to test Jane Eyre for her. It was on this day. Another stranger named Mason came to the manor. Night. A piercing scream broke the silence of the night. It was the stranger named Mason. Bitten by a mysterious woman on the 3rd floor. Jane Eyre helps Rochester secretly send Mason away. Rochester told Jane Eyre not to speak out. The two also had a sincere conversation. Rochester used to be a bohemian and willful person. Later it became a big mistake to live. Wealth is wandering around. He could not get rid of the pain. You can only find peace and happiness in wandering. Finally he was on a friend. Found excellence. A good quality that has not been tainted. Such friendships can revive people. It is heart-wrenching. But he didn't know. He himself to achieve this goal. Whether it is possible to overcome the barriers of customs. Obviously this person is Jane Eyre. With in-depth contact and conversation. Jane Eyre is pure and kind. A clean and white soul. Injection at a time. And shake Rochester in the whirlpool of the world. Tired soul. But every time he tried to confide in Jane Eyre to express his love, Jane Eyre always dodged his words and deeds. I am always a servant. Just a tutor. Soon. Mrs. Leda sent someone to find Jane Eyre. Said she wanted to meet Jane Eyre. And the cousin John who had beaten and scolded her passed away a week ago. Jane Eyre asked Rochester for a period of leave. After returning to my aunt's house, Mrs. Leda gave him a letter. The letter was sent by Jane Eyre's uncle 3 years ago. He asked Mrs. Leda about his niece, because there are no offspring. He wanted to give his inheritance to Jane Eyre. But Mrs. Leda lied. Jane Eyre has died of illness in an orphanage. It wasn't until he died that his conscience was discovered. Tell Jane Eyre the truth. Originally, Rochester only allowed Jane Eyre to leave for 1 week. You can wait until the funeral is over. Jane Eyre has been in Gateshead for a month. When Jane Eyre returned to Thornfield Manor again. When Rochester saw her again, the nerves in his body seemed to be paralyzed. Rochester asked Jane Eyre, "What have you been doing this month?" Jane Eyre started talking to him. At last, Rochester lets Jane Eyre go into rest. Back to Jane Eyre in Thornfield again. Feels like coming home. He was happy and excited. One day, Jane Eyre is walking in the garden. Rochester boldly proposed to him. Jane Eyre agreed. His heart was filled with happiness. The two began to prepare for the wedding, and plans to get married in a month. Rochester is cunning. He was deliberately in front of Jane Eyre, pouring out your love for another woman. He even said he wanted to marry that young lady. It was the rudeness that allowed Jane Eyre to see her true heart. However, on the eve of the wedding, Jane Eyre woke up from her dream. She seemed to see a tall figure, an abominable woman, is wearing her wedding dress. Then the mask of the wedding dress was torn to pieces. Rochester told her it was just a dream. But the next day, when Jane Eyre wakes up, but I found that the mask of the wedding dress was really shattered. Morning. Jane Eyre gets dressed and goes to church with Rochester. Jane Eyre doesn't know if the weather is good or bad. All she had in mind was Rochester. After they entered the church, the wedding took place as scheduled. Just as the pastor was making the proclamation, an uninvited guest broke into the church. Prevent the wedding from taking place. She said Rochester was 15 years ago. He married Mr. Mason's sister Bertha, and presented evidence. In full view. Rochester acknowledged this fact, and led people to see the crazy woman who was locked up on the 3rd floor. That is his legal wife Bertha. He has a history of hereditary psychosis. It was he who set fire to his room in Rochester. It was he who bit Mason, and tore the mask of Jane Eyre's wedding dress. That's it. Jane Eyre went through a severe test. Rochester deceived him. The law also hindered their love. Both fell into deep pain, despite Rochester's repeated explanations. But after a miserable night, Jane Eyre was still grief-stricken. Left Thornfield Manor, because Jane Eyre doesn't have much savings. After the flowers are gone, you can only sleep in the wind, begging along the way. Finally, due to physical weakness, fainted in front of the house of the Reverend St. John, saved by St. John and his 2 sisters. After Jane Eyre slept for 3 days and 3 nights, finally came to his senses. Under the care of St. John's family, gradually regained strength. Jane Eyre is homeless at this point, taken in by St. John. St. John also profited from her job as a village teacher. A mountain village farmhouse. It became Jane Eyre's temporary home. There are 20 students here. They are all children from poor families. Only 3 of them can read. None of them can write and count. Jane Eyre's responsibility is to nurture these sprouts. One day at dusk, Jane Eyre looks at the sunset. While comforting myself, face up to your heart. At this time St. John came. He asked Jane how she felt about her first day. Jane Eyre wholeheartedly and faithfully. She works as a rural female teacher. Gradually became a person liked by the nearby villagers. This period, Jane Eyre is apparently calm. But I often encounter Rochester in my dreams. I was also a little restless. Later, St. John received a notice from the family lawyer that his Uncle John had died, leaving Jane Eyre £20,000. and entrusting St. John to find Jane Eyre. At this time, St. John discovered that Jane Eyre turned out to be his cousin, and after the two recognized each other, Jane Eyre insisted on dividing the inheritance equally with them. However, St. John was a fanatical believer who was going to go on a mission in India, and before leaving he proposed to Jane Eyre, but he frankly told Jane Eyre that he was not marrying her because he loved her, but that he needed a very educated assistant. Jane Eyre felt that she could be his assistant, but did not want to be his wife. But St. John said that cousin relationships don't work. What he needs is a wife. One can be effectively controlled by him in life. A partner who can accompany him until his death. Although Jane Eyre felt that she should repay his kindness. But he felt that this man had no emotions. But he didn't love himself. His praise is only for his own ideals. So he didn't agree to him for a long time. That night, St. John was waiting for Jane Eyre's answer in the moor. Just as Jane Eyre was about to make a decision, she seemed to hear Rochester calling her name from afar. And Jane Eyre felt that there was a voice in her heart constantly calling her. Made Jane Eyre irresistible. At this time, Jane Eyre understood how she should choose. She decided to go back to Rochester. But when Jane Eyre returned to Thornfield Manor again, however, it was found that the entire manor had been turned into ruins. Turned out to be a few months ago. On a stormy night, the wind woman Bertha set fire to the entire manor. Then he also fell to his death. And Rochester saved her. Not only was one arm burned, even his eyes were injured. Became blind. She is lonely. Now lives on a farm outside Eyre. When Jane Eyre arrives at the farm, finally found the sad and desperate Rochester. The two confided in their respective experiences. Jane Eyre was greatly shocked by her behavior. He chose to marry her. 2 years later, Jane Eyre cured one of Rochester's eyes. She also finally saw Jane Eyre again. Also saw the first child of the two. They finally got their ideal happy life. The story is over. Jane Eyre follows her heart. Continue to pursue the love of your heart. But when she finds Rochester, discover the tall and heroic lover of yours. But it has become blind. People with disabilities. At this time inherit the inheritance. Jane Eyre, who was already rich, did not dislike her. It's more about distress and love. When a lover encounters misfortune, Jane Eyre did not choose to abandon. Keep your promises. Take responsibility for yourself. No matter what the lover becomes, still the chosen one in love. A person's life does have to go through a lot of mud. There were many twists and turns. But after a fall, stand up bravely and fearlessly walked forward. How many people can do it? The greatness of Jane Eyre. It's not because I've done anything earth-shattering. It's because it's in the ordinary. When facing your own life, know how to choose. And be brave enough to do it. Even in confusion, can always stick to their original beliefs. When encountering injustice, he will resist bravely. When determining the goal, he will work hard to pursue it. No matter how much it has been experienced, they have always maintained a pure and powerful heart. Many people have complained about the injustice of fate. But in fact, fate has long given us countless choices. And our decision, but it will be the key to changing fate. Of course, the interpretation of the video does not fully show this work. Classics still have their own experience. Here is recommended that you read more of the original book.